marriage migration has been emerging phenomena, not only in Taiwan, but also in Korea, Japan, and other countries. Basically, I understand it as part of the capitalist globalization process. As you can see, that it's almost parallel with the labor migration. Basically, the sending countries of marriage migrants are also sending countries of migrant workers. And just to give you some background of marriage migration phenomena in East Asia, some numbers. In 2010, according to OECD, about a quarter of the permanent migration flows to Japan, and more than half of the permanent migration flow to South Korea are marriage migrants. And 2012, nearly 13% of the registered marriage in Taiwan are actually with foreign brides. And almost 40% of marriages in Singapore involve at least one citizen of the one citizen and non-citizen. Earlier, I have constructed the diagram of this process, capitalism and the development of marriage migration. I won't go to details, just give you an idea that actually capitalist development involve or creation of the so-called core countries and the periphery countries. And for the core countries, of course, they want to have cheaper labor and have an expanded market. For the periphery countries, the main purpose is to get the fund, to get the money. So for the peripheral country, they send migrants, their workers out to get the money to their country. For example, Philippines, sending their laborers out actually give the #1 resource of their national income. But in order to be a migrant worker outside, you have to pay workers' fee. That means if you don't have enough saving, you may not even be able to afford to be migrant workers. So in those families, to become a marriage migrant is another way out. For those who cannot afford to pay for the workers to become migrant workers, their way out is through marriage. Because marriage not only gives you the opportunity to have the residency in the better off countries, but also you will get the dowry from the husband's family. But those who are in need of marrying marriage migrants are not rich people. They are mostly working class or small farmers. In other words, they are also marginalized in their own country, and they become marginalized in the marriage market. I have to say that marriage is a very cruel thing. It's a market. For those marginalized people, they cannot even find women willing to be married with them. That's the way out. So I see the marriage migration as a union of two marginalized people, men to solve their problems of having a family and continue the family line, and for the women to find a way out of the poverty and the political turmoil in the home countries. Okay? Given this context, those foreign brides actually are facing a lot of constraints. One, economic difficulties, because they are not marrying the rich men, right? Many of them become the primary source of income of the husband's family, because husband may lose jobs, or they become disabled because of their working conditions, and so on and so forth. And they are isolated. They lose all the network once they become foreign bride. And many of them actually don't speak the local language. For example, those from Southeast Asian countries married to Taiwan, they don't speak Chinese. Or they may be Chinese descendants, but they don't speak Mandarin, and they cannot read Chinese. Okay? And they face a severe discrimination. They are seen as causes of social problems. And their marriage are seen as fake marriage. And the quality, quote unquote, quality of them and their children are in question. Quality meaning that they have lower education, they are from the lower class, and they are seen as wasting the social welfare benefits, because they are seen as someone come to Taiwan just steal the welfare. And there are a lot of illegal constraints, not only because Taiwan, for example, is not a country that sees itself as immigration host country. So we don't have a comprehensive immigration policy and laws, but also because of the discrimination. They are seen as problems. So increasing barriers for them to become citizens. And in Taiwan, if you don't have ID, meaning the citizenship, basically you have no rights. Okay? And the barriers are increasing. So it's getting more and more difficult for them to become citizens. Why is it that marriage migration become a phenomenon? I see it as a reproduction crisis in the capitalist societies. And it's a process of restructuring of reproduction, meaning that the women from the poorer countries are sent to the better off countries to perform the reproductive roles. Okay? Women has been doing free reproductive labor forever, right? But because of the increasing women's labor force participation, we see a lot of states facing welfare crisis, because who will be taking care of the children, the family? And because of competition in the capitalist society, most countries are retreating from the welfare states, and they privatize all the welfare benefits. So for the better middle class family, they can solve the problems of reproduction by importing foreign domestic workers to take care of family needs. But it's actually a band-aid solution, because what about the lower class family, right? And so actually the fertility rates continue to drop in East Asia. Japan has been known to be the lowest. Taiwan now is lower than Japan. I think Taiwan now is the lowest. Okay, so the working class and the peasant family cannot even afford to hire a domestic worker to take care of the family. So instead, they go to foreign countries to find women to marry. So we are witnessing a restructuring of reproduction. Foreign brides in this context contribute to the reproduction, to the host country in three folds. One, they maintain the pool of low income, the pool of cheap labor themselves because they work, and also renewal of labor. Okay, they have children and renew the labor force, and also maintain the labor force, because to take care of the family, husbands is to maintain the labor force. We talk about border. Actually, it's an intensifying border control and discrimination. And the state is actually facing legitimacy crisis. Because the border control in this context of marriage migrants is in the name of quality control. They are fearful of the marriage migrants from the lower class, the poorer countries, because they are worried that they are giving too many children. And that's going to lower the quality of the whole population to compete globally. Actually, in Taiwan, we use the concept population quality, 人口素质, very literally to describe the anxiety of these marriage migrants. But actually, the state cannot deny the marriage migrants coming, because they cannot deny their citizens to marry a foreign bride, right? If they can claim themselves as a democratic country. So instead of targeting their own citizens, those lower class and peasant men, they target the poor foreign women for having low quality. It's not only in Taiwan, but also, for example, in Korea, although they have this so-called Multicultural Family Support Act, but actually it's assimilation act. They want to assimilate those foreign brides to become more Koreans than the real Koreans. So this discrimination actually is intensified by globalization context, in the globalization context, because the concern of the so-called population quality is intensified, especially after the financial crisis in 1997. Before, I won't go to the details, I traced the newspaper reports on the concept of population quality. Before 1997, it focused on our own people, like the low education, the indigenous peoples, lower income family. But suddenly, after 1997, all the talk about the population quality shift to marriage migrants, because the rising power of mainland China, it really becomes threatening to Taiwan. And the talk is about how can we compete with China with such a huge population and the market. And the answer is that we have higher quality of population than the mainland Chinese. It's very racist, but it's taken for granted. And then they realize the influx of marriage migrants. So the question is that this influx of marriage migrants and their children will deteriorate the quality of our Taiwanese population. Okay. Multiculturalism has become a popular talk, but actually it touched on the nerves of national anxiety. Can you see the picture in this clip? This guy, Norwegian guy, Breivik, in 2011. It's actually a photocopy of the newspaper coverage. Can you see on the side, scribble in Chinese? It's a hate mail sent to me. Actually, I've been receiving a lot of hate mails because I'm kind of a public figure for migrant issues, particularly marriage migrants. So whenever there's an issue, whenever I wrote something on the newspaper or appear on the press conference, I got hate mails. I have those people who love me very much. Right after this incident, because this guy, before he went on killing, he videotaped himself on YouTube. And there's a quote, something like, he admired Taiwan, Korea, and Japan for not being multicultural. Okay? And after that YouTube was known, the government of Taiwan immediately had a press conference saying that they double-checked all the entry, the visa and entry of foreigners, and this guy never visited Taiwan. And because he never visited Taiwan, so he might misunderstand Taiwan. And actually, we are very multicultural. But at the same time, I got this message from someone who's been following me. I don't know who he is. I didn't get the full page. What he's basically saying in this scribble is that, you know, you guys, like people like you are bastards. We need to get rid of those trash people, migrant workers and marriage migrants and all the children. And when can Taiwan have such a hero, this guy, to kill off all of you guys, hypocrites and those bastards, meaning the migrant workers and the marriage migrants? And of course, I reported to police, right? And nothing happened because they cannot trace the letters. Anyway. Another incident, 2013, just last year, there are a lot of multicultural festivals, programs, but just last year, I think it's in May. I don't know if you know about this, but anyway, the Philippine Coast Guard start shooting on the fishermen and kill the fishermen. Okay, it become a big issue. Of course, all the Taiwanese are angry at the Filipino government. But you know what they did? They get the anger out of those migrant workers and marriage migrants in Taiwan. I just show you some of the clip from the news. Can you see this? For those who can read Chinese. Okay, basically saying it's the stand selling pork. My pork is not for Filipino. Okay? No sales to non-humans, because 非人 Filipino in Chinese sounds like not human. Okay? And this one say 不卖非人, no sales to non-humans, meaning not Filipino. Please don't shoot me. Okay? These are just ordinary citizens. They can be very nice neighbors, can be a nice people. But because of this conflict between the two governments, they do this very proudly. They even speak in front of the news, say, you know, that's the way to be patriotic. Okay? And me and other friends, advocates for migrant groups, of course, we held a press conference against this. Of course, we got another set of hate mails. That's just recent. Because of conflict between Vietnam and China about the territory, the oiling, there is an anti-Chinese movement protest in Vietnam, and the Taiwanese businessmen or people working in Taiwanese companies are also affected. Okay? And there is becoming a tension between Vietnamese and Taiwanese. Okay. But what's very sad is that, oh, sorry. This picture was just taken a few days ago. A group of Vietnamese migrants in Taiwan held a press conference. They never held press conference on their own. But this time they held press conference to apologize to the Taiwanese public. Okay. I think because they feel like they are hostage. Okay. Just like when the conflict between Taiwan and the Philippines, the Filipinos actually are calling me, they are beaten up by people on the street. So they also feel they are being hostage in Taiwan. These stories in Taiwan are not alone. I just mentioned one in Korea. 2008, Korea government very quickly passed Multicultural Family Support Act, which actually is assimilating the marriage migrants. And they have a lot of budgets trying to support, but actually assimilating them. These are just like a chart of all the budgets here going to different programs for marriage migrants and their children. And this is one of the propaganda of the Korean government. Can you see this one? Children of different color faces, and they say we are Koreans. But at the same time, there is a growing movement, mostly internet-based, of anti-multicultural family. I couldn't find their picture. I found this picture. This is a young Korean woman who protests in front of the Congress. It says, I can only read the English version under here. No multiculturalism. Again, you see an ordinary young woman. So these anti-migrants are not just the old, uneducated people. Even these young people have this sense of resentment against migrants. A little bit top points about the issue of multicultural citizenship. as we all know, that because of globalization, the border between nation states are becoming blurred. So there are talk about, the citizenship should be beyond the nation states, so like a post-national citizenship and so on and so forth. And multicultural citizenship is one of this theory trying to break the nation states in the globalization context. But Australia and many Western European countries are talking about the retreat of multiculturalism. Basically, they are saying that multiculturalism doesn't work and it's not right. Okay. I won't go to the details, but I just want, in the following, I want to argue that multiculturalism means different things in different contexts, especially in East Asia. It's very different and have different impacts. I want to focus more on Taiwan because that's where I'm from and I know the best. Just some background statistics. We have a population about 23, 24 million. It's an island state. We have about 440,000 workers, mainly from Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam. And 60% plus of them are women, and most of domestic workers. And we have another, now it's almost 500,000 marriage migrants from mainland China and from Southeast Asia. Okay, this is just the top 5 countries. And the peak of this influx of marriage migrants is about 2002. About 1/4 of newborn babies are born to marriage migrants. And 1/8. 1 out of 8 big newborn babies are by these marriage migrants. And 1 out of 4 marriages of local men with foreign brides. And that's exactly the time when the government suddenly want to put together some policy and laws to regulate the marriage migrants. Just some background about citizenship and immigration policy in Taiwan. Taiwan, the tradition of the citizenship is based on blood. Okay, I can never pronounce this. Sanguinis. And it's also patriarchal. Prior to the change of Nationality Act in 2000, only foreigners, only women foreigners married to Taiwanese men can get a citizenship. Okay. But then they changed that, so either men or women married to a Taiwanese citizen can become Taiwanese citizen. But their status actually dependent on the husband's citizenship. And we didn't have comprehensive policies of immigration until 2003. And why 2003? It's because that number I show you, suddenly the government become panic and they want to pass a lot of things, including to establish national immigration agency, which is responsible for immigrants and migrant workers. And the motive behind this is the fear of the quality, as I mentioned earlier. But the concept of multiculturalism did not start because of the recent influx of marriage migrants. It started in the 80s. The part of the democratization process against KMT government. We have this anti-KMT government movement since the 1980s. IP, meaning indigenous people, first appeared in the Constitution in 1994. For those who don't know much about Taiwan history, just a very, very brief background. The majority of Taiwanese people are Han group. Okay, Han people from mainland China through different waves of immigration. The largest group came to Taiwan about 400 years ago. And the second largest is Hakka, about 200 years ago. And before the immigration of those Han people from China, we have a lot of indigenous people from different tribes, different groups. they have at least 40 languages. Okay? Even though now the government even recognized about 15 of them as an IP. Okay, and because of the anti-KMT, meaning KMT is from mainland China, okay, after the war. So the presence of indigenous people become a ground of negating the legitimacy of the ruling of KMT government because you are from outside, right? And then they borrow a lot of talk about multiculturalism, especially from Australia and Canada, to promote multiculturalism as a way towards the modern state. That's the background of multicultural discourse in Taiwan. But DPP, which is the opposition party, and won the election in 2000. Finally, they defeated KMT and they won the election. And multiculturalism, democracy, and human rights becomes the main rhetorics in public, okay? As opposed to PRC, opposed to China, because China is framed as anti-human rights, anti-democracy, and anti-multiculturalism. Okay. So the original notion of multiculturalism in this nation building, meaning against the mainland China, a project, okay, originating from the anti-KMT movement, did not include migrant workers or immigrants at all at the time. So to promote the rights of the migrant workers and immigrants, we strategically use the rhetoric of multiculturalism to promote the issues. So we radicalize the existing rhetoric, including multiculturalism, democracy, and human rights. And we demonstrate the values of multiculturalism by showing the marriage migrants' active involvement in the movement, in all the protests, which I will show later. Okay. This immigrant movement started when I was doing my research and also active in the community movement, and realized that there are increasing number of marriage migrants. So I started the Chinese program for them in 1995. So I've been doing this for the past 20 years, almost 20 years. And this Chinese program is actually based on the practice of liberation education. The Brazilian educator, Paulo Freire. And combined with a Brazilian theatrist, Augusto Boa, the theater of the oppressed, okay, as a means to empower the marriage migrants and also the local volunteers. I will show you briefly some of those photos, how we do it. And we create a venue for the marriage migrants to speak for themselves through writing, paintings, video, theater, and so on and so forth. And they are also active participating in the Alliance, ARLIM, which is Alliance for Human Rights Legislation for Immigrants and Migrants, and also internationally in IMA, International Migrants Alliance, and AMORE is a network, action network for marriage migrants' rights and empowerment, which we created for marriage migrants internationally. This is a group photo in 1995 when we first started the Chinese program. It's in Meinong, which is a Hakka town in southern Taiwan. And we do a lot of visiting of their family to know their family and try to be friends with their family. And after a lot of trials and errors, a module of the program started. Like we have the warm-up exercise, usually a game or theater exercise, and then each class will have a theme, we'll have discussion, and then we teach the words in Chinese. Okay. After 8 years of trying to put them together and organize them, in 2003 they decided to form their own organization. That's when TASAT was formed, TransAsia Sisters Association of Taiwan. This is the first national grassroots organization for marriage migrants. So they are discussing the constitution. Okay? It's a press conference. It's the first time the marriage migrants, form their own organization. Okay. Since its formation, TASAT has 3 main programs. The main goal is still empowerment of marriage migrants, but through organizing, public education, and advocacy and campaign. These are just some examples. Okay, we do a lot of trainings for the marriage migrants and also for the volunteers, local volunteers, including students. Public education through, we train them as multicultural lecturers and as teachers of their own language, and also about immigration issues. Actually, recently, we managed to put the Southeast Asian language in the elementary and high school curriculum, required curriculum. So the children of marriage migrants can learn their mother tongue at school. That's a recent development. And we have done a lot of publication. This one in the middle, published in 2005. It's a collection of their story writing in their own language, also in Chinese, and pictures, poetry, and so on and so forth. Okay. And actually, this publication got a lot of attention, including the famous filmmaker Hsiao-Chuan Hsia. He appeared in our press conference to support TASAT's program, which led to the production of a documentary film. I will show later. Chinese is really difficult to learn as a foreign language, right? So we use a lot of artwork. Drawing is one thing. We encourage them to draw how they feel. This is by one Indonesian member. Actually, it's a children's book. It's one page of her book. She says that this is my hometown in Indonesia. It's Taipei. You see 101, right? It's very different. The only thing that's the same is the sun. Means the hope. Okay. Theater. Chinese is very difficult, so we use body language. In 2009, collectively decided that we will form a theater group and go around Taiwan to discuss with the publics about the issues. This is their first presentation in 2009. Actually, last Sunday, we just have another new performance. And the children are always involved. Whenever we have programs, the children also have their program. So the children also have their own theater. This is a documentary film made by these marriage migrants, encouraged by Hsiao-Chuan Hsia. Okay. He did not produce or edit the film for us. He gave us an idea that we should collectively edit our stories. So all the, including interviewing, shooting, editing, narrating, singing, all the musics are done by the marriage migrants. It's done in 2 years with no professional equipment, just our old PC in the office. The title of the film is Let's Not Be Afraid. In Chinese, 姐妹卖冬瓜, sisters 卖冬瓜. It sounds like the Thai language, 卖冬瓜. Is there a Thai friend here? It means do not be afraid. Okay, the title shows that they want to demonstrate to all the marriage migrants that all the policies are changed because of our efforts, not because the government suddenly decided to be nice to us. Okay. So we did a lot of campaign advocacy. These are just some examples. I want to focus on this one. It's the first protest in 2003 in front of the Congress, because the Congress was going to review the proposal to establish a national immigration office. Okay? But the proposal is very anti-human rights of the migrants. So you see the front lines, the marriage migrants from different countries organized by TASAT. So every time when we have protests, the women are also always in front. They're the speakers. They are not someone whose voice are covered by the local people. Okay. We also have a lot of solidarity work with other marginalized people, including migrant workers and also indigenous people. And also try to link them with the movement organizations in their home countries. Because the very reason why they come to Taiwan is because of problems in the home countries. So they have to link the issues between the host country and the home countries. And linking them with the international movement, especially migrant movement and women's movement. These are just some examples. The major achievements are some of the following. In 2007, we managed to amend the Immigration Act. The results are the following. The victims of domestic violence can stay in Taiwan. Before, even if they're victims of domestic violence, once they divorce, they will be deported. Okay? But because of the change, they are entitled to stay now. Although there are still some limitations, we are still working on the second round of amendment. And they have the right to assembly and protest. Before, foreigners cannot participate in any protests or rallies. You can be deported if they want. And there are provisions on anti-discrimination in the law, and also provision on due process. Another big campaign is against the financial requirement. Before the amendment, all the marriage migrants have to provide this amount, okay? 14,000 US as in saving, or to prove that you are wealthy enough to become Taiwanese citizens, to apply for naturalization. So you can imagine there are a lot of criteria. You may meet all the criteria, but if you don't have enough money, after 3 years of staying in Taiwan, you can still not get the citizenship. So a lot of women have to borrow money from brokers, and the interest, of course, is very high, or they still cannot afford, and they become overstayer, or like some problems. And after a serious campaign, finally this requirement was canceled. This is one of the peak of this protest. It's also a historical event for marriage migrants issued in 2007, September 9, and there are thousands of marriage migrants and supporters march on the street. And their children are also involved in this protest. This is another set of amendment of laws for marriage migrants from mainland China, because the tension between Taiwan and China, mainland Chinese are not nationals. They are also not foreigners. They are enemies. So we have different set of policies and laws. Okay, so we had to change another set of law for marriage migrants from mainland China. Eventually, there was an amendment in 2009. Before the change, they were required to stay in Taiwan at least 8 years to become eligible to apply for citizenship. Now it's changed to 6 years. Still, for the other nationalities, the foreigners, it's 4 years to become citizens, the minimum of years. Now we want to change this again to become equal to other foreigners. Of course, you can see the resistance from the people, the politicians, because they are Chinese, mainland Chinese, they are enemies. So we're still struggling for that. Before the change, they are not allowed to work, but now because of change, they are entitled to work. And there was a limit of property inheritance of 2 million before. Now there's no limit. Okay, you can see their restriction is much more than other foreigners. But the government, as I said earlier, the movement used multiculturalism as a strategy, narrative strategy, to campaign. At the same time, the government also twisting multiculturalism. Just some examples. They have a lot of programs sponsoring traditional activities, like these marriage migrants who dress the traditional costume, dance, food, you know, very feminine and very exotic. Just one example story, anecdotal. One time the Ministry of Culture contacted me because they want to promote cultural citizenship as our government policy. And they want me to have some marriage migrants to perform in the festival. I said, okay, we have a theater, they can perform. So they want me to say, what's the content? Okay, it's a story about how they are isolated at the beginning, mistreated, and they become active. Oh, okay. Can they sing? Yes, we can sing. Actually, we have a song dedicated to the marriage migrants. It's again about how they are mistreated and they become in contact with the other friends through the Chinese programs. We can sing this. And they say, okay, I'll contact you later, and never come back to me. Of course, they want this traditional way of performing multiculturalism. And in their report about achievement of multicultural program, they manipulate a lot of statistics. For example, they talk about media representation, multicultural representation. So not only Taiwanese, or not only Chinese language, right? So what are the TV station programs they projected as the evidence of multicultural? HBO. So they manipulate those numbers to show that we are increasingly multicultural in media in every aspect. And critical groups like TASAT can never get good funding from the government. Okay, they always give us hard time. So that's why people like our group are actually struggling to maintain the group and at the same time to be very active in campaigning all those bad policies. Okay, some thoughts about rethinking citizenship from the perspective of social movement. I found that most theories of citizenship are too philosophical, like how we should get together or ethical. And the issues about how to transform the exclusionary regime of citizenship to be a more inclusive one have been neglected. That's why a lot of the critique of multiculturalism for me doesn't really help me, people like me. How do we change the policies in the countries like in East Asia, like Taiwan, that's based on blood, homogeneity, right? And the meaning of multiculturalism actually need to be historicized and contextualized. Unlike Europe, countries in Europe or North America, Australia, the influence of migrants are pretty recent. So the concept of multiculturalism have actually different implications in Taiwan or East Asia, like Korea. And critics in Europe worry about multiculturalism may make it worse. The socioeconomic and cultural distinction, and actually may foster spatial segregation, right? But the thing about marriage migrants is that they are within the communities of the Taiwanese people, so there would not be spatial segregation. Okay? There will not be ethnic enclave because they are within the families. Being literally part of Taiwanese family, especially as mothers of Taiwanese citizens, the government cannot deny outright the marriage migrants are entitled to the rights of teaching their children their mother tongue. That's why we are successfully campaigning for inclusion of their language in the elementary program and their rights to practice democracy. And compared to migrant workers, actually marriage migrants provide a great opportunity to challenge the regime of Jews, sanguinis citizenship. Okay. And because as an emerging new country of host countries, we lack infrastructure for marriage migrants, for the interpreters and so on and so forth. So multiculturalism actually creates a new space for them to get a better job and political space for them to participate in the democracy. So it's a political field where discourse of governing and empowering immigrants are constantly contested. And what's crucial is that the marriage migrants themselves are participating in this contestation. Okay, 2 slides. Going back to East Asia countries, Korea, Taiwan, and Japan, I have this initial comparisons. Multiculturalism or the position of marriage migrants are actually intertwined with these 3 aspects: the positioning in global political economy, and the characteristic of the nation state, nation building, and the characteristic of the social movements. So I try to compare and contrast. Japan, its global positioning was a former empire as a colonizer, and South Korea was trying to move up, in the globalization, as well as Taiwan. It's the same. But in terms of nation building, Japan, they have more autonomous local government. Okay, they don't have a national central government's policy for immigration, but have a lot of programs at the local level. And South Korea has a very homogeneous and a strong state, and Taiwan is a weak state with splitting identities, pro-independence or pro-unification, pro-KMT or pro-DPP. Is very splitted. And in terms of social movements, Japan is weak, more active in NGOs at the local levels. For South Korea, they are strong at both grassroots and national levels. And for Taiwan, mediocre in between, but again, very splitting and weak at the grassroots. And the type of multiculturalism and the role of marriage migrants in the contestation in Japan is considered as a local matters, how people interact with each other, not the national policies, not dealing with the national policies. And migrants are seen as recipients of services of NGOs. And South Korea, they're engaging in national policies, but the local activists have a stronger roles. They tend to intervene, and the marriage migrants becoming indecisive, non-decisive in the movement. And for Taiwan, because of the background of the politics, we tend to be more minority sensitive. So we also engage in national policies. The local activists tend to just support them instead of leading them. So we tend to do more empowerment of the marriage migrants, and the marriage migrants play a crucial role in the movement. Okay, I just want to talk about the multiculturalism in the East Asian countries in the globalization context. I will hope that you can have more discussion later on. Thank you. Yep.